We gather here tonight to bring women back to their rightful place.
The Testaments, a new Hulu original series from the executive producers of The Handmaid's Tale.
It's easier to accept a story than believe that the people around you are monsters.
The battle isn't over.
There comes a time when you have to take action, when you have to choose your own destiny.
Never quite as it seems.
Watch the new Hulu original series, The Testaments, streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
SpringFest is heating up at Lowe's. And for a limited time, we have the extra big deals you need to impress guests. Get your outdoor space ready and save $50 on the select Cobalt 24-volt blower kit, now $79. Plus, save $80 on the Charbroil Performance 4-burner grill, now $199. It's springtime, and our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid to 4/13. While supplies last. Selection varies by location.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Sooner Nation podcast. Super glad you're here. We're going to talk Thunder basketball at some point. I'll tell you here in a little bit when that's going to be, but we have to. I mean, we're at a point where I don't think we have an option. We got to talk about it. We've got to talk about the softball version of the Red River rivalry. That's a must. But we're going to start where we always like to start, and that is Oklahoma football, because we're midway point of spring practices. And everyone, I mean, look, everybody's talking spring ball. It's always enthusiasm. It's always excitement. It's always building towards the fall. So you talk about quarterbacks, you talk about the highlight moments, you talk about the spring game buzz with the red-white game making a return later on this month. But what about what actually decides whether Oklahoma survives or thrives in 2026? What about the identity of this team? Because make no mistake, Brent Venables, he's trying to build something this spring, to not tweak it, not make adjustments, but he's literally trying to build on the foundation that was laid in 2025. So let's start here. Let's start with, John Mateer getting the headlines. That's natural, right? You got a second-year quarterback. You got a second-year system, which means there should be new wrinkles, showing flashes in practice. And those things always dominate the conversation this time of the year. But if we really want to pay attention to what's happening behind the scenes, I don't think this spring is about the quarterback. I think it's about whether Oklahoma, at its core, at the center of its identity, who it is, are they becoming, have they become, will they become an SEC football team? And obviously, I'm talking more than just a team that plays in that conference. I'm talking about who they are, right? And I think it starts in two places. When you're looking at this team moving from 25 to 26, you look at the second level and then you look in the trenches, all right? So the second level, let's talk about the linebacker room, because I think it's a very interesting spring for Oklahoma. They're got kind of like a quiet shakeup happening, right? You got Owen Heineke. You don't know. You just don't know. His eligibility is absolutely uncertain at this point. And then you got the departures in the transfer portal, and suddenly a position in the group that once looked like it was a full-on stable now looks pretty wide open. And that's where a name you probably weren't expecting to hear this spring suddenly becomes more critical than what you thought it would be, and that's James Nesta. Because this is one of the most fascinating developments, I think, on the entire roster. A sophomore guy who was splitting time with baseball. Now he's all in on football, fully committed to playing linebacker for Oklahoma. And let me tell you, this isn't just a nice story. This, for Oklahoma football, is an absolute necessity. Because when you lose experience at linebacker, you don't just lose tackles, you lose communication, you lose alignment, you lose the ability to adjust pre-snap against complex offenses that are designed specifically to exploit hesitation. And what Venables is trying to build defensively, it requires instinct at that second level. Right? You look at the cheater role, hybrid defender, space player, kind of a chess piece, that position that only works if the linebacker room around it is solid. And right now, Oklahoma is rebuilding that foundation, and they're rebuilding it in real time. And so that's where you hear a name like James Nesta. That's why you understand what it represents. It's not just a position battle. It's a program recalibrating on the fly. And it's definitely something that you're going to want to keep an eye on if you're going to watch the spring game. But then you move into the trenches. Because this, to me, this is where the biggest transformation, I think, has already happened. And frankly, I think it's been a long time coming, if we're being honest. Go back to 2020. All right, that's more than a few years ago, but go back to 2020. Even in the early part of the Venables era, if you want to. And Oklahoma had talent on the defensive line, right? But they didn't necessarily have those SEC caliber bodies because they were in the Big 12. And that's not a knock, all right? That's not because it was a different conference. It was a different philosophy, different needs. So we're not knocking this team. We're just being truthful. They didn't have wave after wave of 300-pounders who could absorb double teams, reset the line of scrimmage, and still have enough left in the tank for the fourth quarter. And that's the difference between the Big 12 and the SEC. Now you're starting to see this development, right? You get David Stone, Jaden Jackson, multiple interior guys tipping the scales north of 300 pounds. Not just big though, but highly functional, explosive, physical, built to take punishment and then also dish it out. And that's what changes the mindset of your entire defense. Because when your defensive line can hold up, really hold up, you free your linebackers to play fast. You eliminate cutback lanes. You force offenses into second and long, third and obvious. You are suddenly the one dictating. And for Brent Venables, that's the entire vision here. This defense, it's not built to react. It's built to attack. But you cannot attack in the SEC if your front can't survive the first punch. And we saw, I think last year, Oklahoma, I know it's only year 2. This is year 3 coming up, but really for the first time in 2025, you saw them look like they might finally have the bodies to do this. Now, are they able to build on it, right? Because you layer in the transfer portal. This is where the modern roster building changes the equation. You throw in a guy like Cole Sullivan, a Michigan transfer, linebacker, and here's the key word. He's ready, right? This isn't a developmental piece. This isn't a let's see what he can become a year from now. He's stepping into a high leverage role right now. And that tells you everything about where Oklahoma feels it needs help. Linebacker isn't just a position group. They're trying to stabilize it. They're wanting to put experience in there. And why a guy like James Nesta represents upside, Sullivan represents certainty. And in this league, you need both. You need young players developing into stars, and you need transfers who can plug holes immediately without the learning curve that might cost you games. Because look, we know this. We saw it, right? One misfit, one blown assignment, one hesitation, touchdown. And so now we get to the big question. I think the one that maybe defines this entire opening segment here. And honestly, I think this is the question that might define Oklahoma's 2026 season. Is the defense still the identity of this team? Don't get me wrong. That's not a bad thing if the answer is yes. Defense ahead of offense all of 2025. Is that going to be the way it is again in 2026? Or does this team need to become more offensive heavy, more offensive led to reach that 12-win ceiling, to be in the hunt for the SEC championship game to be in the hunt for not just a home game in the first round of the playoff, but actually a bye. And when you unpack this a little bit, what you see is that the vision's always been clear with Brent Venables. It's never been a secret. Defense first, right? Remember that physical discipline, relentless pressure that he's talking about? That's the DNA that he has restored. I don't think he's trying to restore it anymore, Norman. He's brought it back. But here's the reality of 2026 college football, and especially in the conference that Oklahoma plays in. You're not just facing power run games anymore. You're facing quarterbacks who can throw for 350 and then still turn around and beat you with their legs. You're facing offenses that can stretch you horizontally and vertically. So you got tempo, you got spacing, you got elite athletes at every skill position. So the question becomes, is building a defense first identity enough for Oklahoma? So here's my take on this. I think for Oklahoma to win 9 or 10 games to kind of be in the neighborhood they were in 2025. Yeah, absolutely. The defense can be your identity. If the defensive line holds, if the linebacker stabilizes, if the scheme clicks, this team can grind out wins. They can control games. They can compete at a high level. But if we're thinking beyond that, right? If we're thinking beyond the 9 to 10 and going to like the 11 and 12 win total, if we're talking about not just making the playoffs, but contending in the playoffs, if we're talking about beating the best teams that the SEC has to offer, then no, it can't just be defense. It has to be complementary dominance, because the teams at the top of this league, they don't choose between offense and defense. They overwhelm you with both. And that's where John Mateer and this offense as a whole, that's where they have to come back into this conversation about the 2026 team. Because while the defense is being built to survive this conference, the offense is going to have to. They're going to have to become the unit that wins it. So what you're seeing this spring for Oklahoma, it's not just position battles. I think it's identity construction. It's Brent Venables asking, can we be physical enough? Can we be deep enough? Can we be disciplined enough? Not just to belong in the SEC, but to matter in this conference. So the linebacker shuffle, the reinforced trenches, the transfer portal additions, those aren't isolated storylines. They are pieces of a bigger puzzle. And by the time we get to the fall, we're going to find out if Oklahoma has finally built a team that doesn't just survive Saturdays, but they dictate them. That's it for segment 1. We're glad you're here with us. Make sure you like, subscribe wherever you're catching the Sooner Nation podcast. Make sure you follow us online, heartland-sports.com. Look us up on Facebook. We hit 18,000 on our Facebook page, and we're growing. We want you to be a part of that. We've got subscriber content. Obviously, we're on Instagram. Very poorly, I might add, but we are on Instagram. Look us up. We're going to talk Thunder, but hang with this because we're also going to talk Oklahoma, Texas softball.
If we knew more about our sleep, what would we do differently? Would we go to bed at a consistent time or take steps to reduce interruptions to our sleep? With Sleep Score, Apple Watch measures your bedtime consistency, interruptions, and sleep duration. Then, every morning it combines these factors into an easy-to-understand score from 1 to 100. So you'll know how to take the quality of your sleep from okay to very high. Know your sleep score with Apple Watch. iPhone 11 or later required.
Okay, so let's have some fun with this. I mean, we don't talk Thunder basketball enough. But the truth is, this is the Sooner Nation podcast. We kind of make it like a Thunder Nation segment here and there. We just don't talk about it enough. But now we have to. Now we have to, because you're sitting with the number 1 seed, the best record in the league. It's guaranteed now. So let's have some fun with this, right? Let's talk regular season greatness versus immortality, all right? The question is this: are the Thunder a dynasty, all right? So as we shift gears, not too far, but as we shift gears, we're still going to talk about identity because that's kind of where we led with Oklahoma football. But we're also going to talk about dominance. We're going to talk about what separates great from historical. Now we're talking about specifically the Oklahoma City Thunder, because what happened on Wednesday night, I think it just demands a bigger conversation. This isn't a good season for the Thunder. This isn't like a conversation about being a championship contender. I mean, this is a legacy conversation because the Thunder just secured their third straight number one seed in the Western Conference. Let me say that again because it matters here. Three straight years in the West, the Thunder have been the number one overall seed. And I think this is where the conversation changes. There's a line in sports. You can feel it when a team crosses it. When they stop being, quote, fun, they stop being young, they stop being up and coming, and they start becoming something else, something heavier, something historical. And that's where Oklahoma City is right now, because here's the reality. They're not just this, well, let's put it this way. They are now just only the seventh team in NBA history to finish with the best record in their conference for 3 straight years. And you go and you look at that list. You got the Celtics, you got the Showtime Lakers, Jordan's Bulls, Shaq Kobe Lakers, the Warriors dynasty. That's not just a list that you visit. That's a list that if you're a franchise, you want to be on that list. You want to join that list. But here's the tension. And here's the entire point of this segment. Does that make this team a dynasty? Or does it just make them a team on the edge of a dynasty? Because history is very clear about one thing. The number one seed, it's a resume line, all right? The championship is the legacy. And let's talk about what makes this version of the Thunder different. Because here's the scary part, I think, for the rest of the NBA. This 2026 team might be actually better than the 24-25 team that won the championship. And that's not hype. That's just evolution. You start with SGA, right? He's the engine. And we've run out of ways to describe consistency. Let's just call it what it is. 131 straight games of 20 plus points. That's not a stat. That's a psychological advantage. Opponents don't walk into games thinking, how do we stop SGA? They walk in thinking, how do we survive SGA? Because you already know what you're getting. You're getting 30 points. You're getting efficiency. You're getting control. And when you have that kind of certainty at the top, everything else stabilizes. Now you layer in a guy like Chet Holmgren, who just went off on my Clippers on Wednesday night. And I think this is where it really turns the conversation dangerous. Because Chet isn't the same player he was during the title run, right? You go back a year ago, elite rim protector, right? Defensive anchor, but now he's becoming an offensive hub. And we just saw it, 30 points, 14 rebounds against the Clippers. That's not complimentary basketball. That's a centerpiece, right? That's centerpiece basketball. And when your rim protector becomes a guy who can carry offense in stretches, that's when a team stops being balanced and starts being overwhelming. And then there's Jalen Williams, right? The X factor that makes this whole thing work, because every great team needs a third player who doesn't just fill space. They close games. And J-Dub has become that guy. He's no longer just a playmaker. He's a finisher. He's a shot creator. He's a guy you trust in the final 2 minutes when everything slows down and the defense is locked in. And here's the key. They have 3 players who can all create their own shot late. And that's the separator. That's what takes you from 57 wins to 64 wins. That's what takes you from dangerous to certain. And you bring in the math here because, numbers do matter, right? You got a team right now that's sitting on 64-16. Not just a great record, a historically predictive record, right? Teams that win 64 plus games and reach the finals, they win the title about 85% of the time as the number one seed. Right? Just as the number one seed, your path gets even clearer, right? Second round win rate for number one seeds around 92%. Since 1985, around 62.5% of the NBA champions have been number one seeds. So when Oklahoma City locks up that top spot again, they're not just earning respect, they're increasing probability. You know there's going to be a but here, right? But here's where everything shifts and where the pressure becomes. Because last year, they were the hunters. This year, they're the final boss, if you know what I mean. Every great story needs a threat, right? Enter Wemby and the San Antonio Spurs. Because while Oklahoma City sits at the top, there is something rising beneath them, behind them, underneath them, however you want to say it, right? Spurs are sitting on 61 wins. Wemby's putting up video game numbers himself, 24 points, 11 boards, 3 blocks. That's his averages. And more importantly, the Spurs are dramatically better when he's on the floor. Right? He's not just a star, he is a system. Suddenly, what we're looking at feels familiar, right? Lakers Spurs in the 2000s, right? It's like a passing of the torch or fighting to keep it. Because if Oklahoma City is the dynasty in waiting, then Wemby is the one player in the league that I think is built to disrupt that. So now we arrive at a question, one that defines everything. What makes a dynasty? Is it dominance? Is it consistency? Is it innovation? Is it rings? Because if you're being honest with history, I think you got to go to the rings. I think that's where it is. I think that's where it's always been. And that's where the Thunder sit right now. They're right there on the edge. Because if they go to the finals and lose, they risk becoming something else entirely, something that we've seen before. Yeah, the mid-2000s, right? Phoenix Suns, revolutionary, entertaining, dominant in the regular season, but ultimately remembered as a what if. And I know Joe Thunder fan, right? He's going to say, no, we're defending champions. And you are. You are. But what if you were even more than that? And that's what we're talking about. That's the danger of this moment, because once you hit this level, once you hit that 60-plus game win, once you stack number one seeds, the expectations change. And if a 3-year period, you get one championship out of that, it's not going to be enough. Right? A Western Conference Finals exit, that's not growth, that's failure. So here's our verdict here, right? Does another number one seed make them better? Of course it does. This is a more complete team than the 24-25 champions. They're more versatile on offense. They have more scoring options. They have more ways to win. But in the history books, that number one seed, it just becomes a footnote unless it's followed by something bigger. Here's my final thought on this, and we'll get back to Oklahoma stuff. If the Thunder roll through the West, if they go through a surging Spurs team that's led by Wemby, if they don't just win, but they demoralize the conference, kind of like what they've done in the regular season, then the conversation's over. Right? They're not a dynasty in waiting at that point. They are the new standard. But if they fall short, if they stumble before the finish line, then all of this, the 64 plus wins, the 3 straight number one seeds, the statistical dominance, it becomes a question, not necessarily an answer. And that's what makes this postseason so compelling. Because Oklahoma City isn't just playing for a title, they're playing for how history is going to remember them. All right, we're going to jump back into Oklahoma Sooners. Big weekend in softball. I feel like it's always a big weekend in softball if you're a Sooners fan, but it is Oklahoma, Texas, and we're going to break all of that down for you.
When you take a sip of an ice-cold Coke Zero Sugar, you know you're getting real Coca-Cola taste you love. And with zero sugar. It's so delicious, you can almost taste it with your ears. Hear those bubbles? Imagine them tingling on your tongue. Fizzy deliciousness. Listen to that cascading liquid. It's unmistakably tasty. All with zero sugar. Crisp. Refreshing. And ice cold. Ah. Coke Zero Sugar. Real Coca-Cola taste. Zero sugar.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You know those friends who support your preference for podcasts over music on road trips? That's the energy State Farm brings to insurance. With over 19,000 local agents, they help you find the coverage that fits your needs, so you can spend less time worrying about insurance and more time enjoying the ride. Download the State Farm app or go online at statefarm.com. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
All right, let's bring it home. You know, everything we've talked about today in this episode, you look at identity, dominance, legacy, and all that really funnels into one place this weekend. Austin, Texas, right? The Red River rivalry, top 5 matchup in softball, and maybe, just maybe, the defining series of the regular season for college softball. So let's set the stage right here to get started with this final segment. Number 2, Oklahoma. Number 4, Texas. Defending national champions on one side, the sport's most dominant program of the last decade on the other. And here's the hook, the real hook. This isn't just a big series. This is juggernaut versus champion. Because for the first time in a long time, there's a real question being asked. Does Oklahoma still own this sport? Or has Texas actually shifted the balance of power here? And Patty Gasso, she didn't dance around it. She said it plainly. The road to the SEC title goes through Austin. Now, I disagree with Patty, but I feel like Patty has to say that. Because if you read what we write in print on our Facebook page, our subscription content, or even if you go to heartland-sports.com, you're going to see me say clearly that the road to the SEC title goes through Norman. But I could be proven wrong this weekend. So that's why we're starting here. Because I think that's where the stakes live. Oklahoma comes into this game, or this series, 38-3, 11-1 in conference. They've won, they've won every series so far. They just run-ruled Kentucky 3 straight times. They beat LSU. They beat Ole Miss. But they're still walking into Austin as if something needs to be proven. And that's the scary part here. Because when a dynasty starts playing like it has something to prove, that's when it becomes something else entirely. And let's talk about the engine behind all this, the offense, because what we're witnessing right now, not just great, we're witnessing historic. This Oklahoma team is averaging nearly 12 runs per game. They've hit 144 home runs. All right. If you didn't hear me right, that's at 144 home runs. How many does Texas have? 63. That's not a gap, guys. That's a canyon. And here's the part that should make every opposing pitching coach kind of lose some sleep. Oklahoma has hit a home run in 35 of 38 games. So that's not streaky power. That's systemic power. But here's where it gets even more absurd. This might not even be the most impressive part, all right? Because this offense, it's not just powerful, it's deep, right? You look at it, you could call it like the lineup of death. Because 14 different players with at least 3 home runs are on this roster. 10 players batting over 400 are on this roster. 10. I keep waiting for that number to go down, but it doesn't. I mean, in most lineups, you game plan around 2 hitters. I think Texas has 4, right? With Oklahoma, you survive one wave and the next one is just ready, stepping into the box. The 9-hole hitter on this team, it would be a cleanup hitter almost anywhere in the country. And that's what separates this team, even from the legacy of those legendary 2021 squad, right? That team was iconic. But I think this one's probably more complete. And you get to the centerpiece of all of it is a freshman in Kendall Wells, right? Every great offense has a face. And right now, college softball belongs to a freshman. 30 home runs. It's April 9th. Think about that, right? Jocelyn Allo, arguably the greatest hitter in the history of the sport. She hit 30 in her entire freshman season. Kendall Wells has already matched that with weeks left to play in the regular season and then the postseason. And this isn't empty production. She's sitting around 400 batting average. She's driving in runs at a ridiculous clip. She's drawing walks. 5 in a single series. because pitchers are already trying to avoid her. And here's the question you have to ask. Is this the most dangerous freshman Patty Gasso has ever coached? And that's like just the question itself says something. Because you look at the list of names in that conversation, it is the Mount Rushmore, not just of Oklahoma softball. You look at the most iconic freshman that Patty Gasso has coached at Oklahoma, not just the Mount Rushmore of Oklahoma softball, it is the Mount Rushmore of the sport. But what makes Wells different is this. There doesn't seem to be a hole, right? There's no obvious weakness here. There's no pitch that you can exploit. There's no moment that speeds her up. And now Texas has to figure out how to pitch to her. They've got a staff that's posting, a 3.6 ERA in conference play. Now you got to go up against this lineup. Good luck. And then now bring in the emotional layer here, okay? Because this is where things shift from numbers to mentality, right? You look at the series. You look at what Oklahoma's doing in conference play, right? They travel, right? They have elite pitching. They face elite pitching. They have a target on their back every single game, and yet they're not just winning these series, they're dominating them. They're dominating on the road in Baton Rouge. They're dominating at home against Kentucky, against Auburn, on the road at Ole Miss. But this is a team that doesn't feel satisfied. They feel motivated. All season, the narrative was, let's see how they handle not being the defending national champions. Let's see how they handle year 2 in the SEC. Let's see if they can do it again. Let's see what they can do against real competition. How many times have you said, oh yeah, well, they're hitting home runs like no one ever has in the history of the sport, but they haven't played anybody? Because that's the lazy argument. That's the easy argument. They haven't played anybody. Well, of course, when you play top 25 competition, you're not going to score 30 runs, but tell me who else is scoring 30 runs against bad competition? So they've not resisted this narrative. That's the thing. This team has not resisted the narrative. They have embraced it. They've turned that into fuel. And I think this is probably why we're talking about the most dangerous version of Oklahoma softball that we've seen. Because they're not just talented, right? They're playing with a chip. And now we arrive at Texas. And I think this is where it gets real, because Texas, they're the defending national champions. They've earned that respect. They've earned the right to be considered the team to beat. Here's the reality right now. They do look human. They just dropped the series to Alabama. You've seen them struggle offensively. They won the series the week before against A&M, but they didn't look great. They've showed vulnerability. And now they've got Oklahoma coming to town. This is what you call a blood in the water type moment, because if Oklahoma takes 2 out of 3 this weekend, they do take control of the SEC regular season race. If they sweep this weekend, they might end it. They might end the regular season race. And stylistically, that's a nightmare matchup for Texas, because Texas plays a very tactical game. They like small ball. They like situational hitting. They like to manufacture runs. Oklahoma, the Sooners they want to overwhelm you. They don't manufacture runs. They detonate them. And if this series turns into a slugfest, Texas, I don't believe, has the firepower to keep up. But there is a wild card here, right? There is a wild card here. Jennifer Rocha, right? The veteran pitching mind, I guess I should say. Steady presence for this bullpen and the girls in the circle. The architect behind what Oklahoma does. And now you're headed into the most hostile road environment of the season, and she's back. And she's into her 3rd series back? That's not nothing. That's something to watch, because you look at since she came back, look at what Oklahoma's pitching numbers have been doing. That ERA has been going down. And you've got an offense that can carry you, right? But sometimes a championship caliber series comes down to pitching decisions, comes down to adjustment, it comes down to feel. And the person who is the best in the country at taking responsibility for those shifts is back. So what is this series? I mean, what are we talking about? Is it a must win for the SEC title or just another step toward Oklahoma City? Here's what I think. I think it's both. Because in the standings, yeah, it's massive. It can decide the SEC race. But when you're looking at something bigger, right? When you're looking at identity, perception, legacy, this is a measure and stick moment for both programs. If Oklahoma goes into Austin and imposes their will, if they hit home runs, if they control games, if they walk out with a series win or a sweep, then the conversation is going to change. We're going to stop asking, or I guess we're going to stop hearing people ask, can Oklahoma handle year 2 of the SEC? What they're going to start saying is, even the SEC couldn't stop Oklahoma. Now, here's a final thought on this, and I guess a final thought for the podcast in general. So thanks again for taking a ride with us. All offseason, we heard it, right? The road to the SEC championships is going to go through Austin. But when you look at this team, you look at the power, you look at the depth, you look at the dominance, you look at the momentum, it doesn't feel like Oklahoma's taking a road trip, right? It feels like they're staging for a takeover because this offense, it doesn't just travel, it translates. And if the Sooners do what they've been doing, if they play their game, if they bring that 12 runs a game, 144 home run juggernaut into Austin, Texas with them, they're not just going to win a series. They're going to remind Texas and the entire sport exactly who the standard really is. So that's it for this episode of the Sooner Nation podcast. Again, make sure you check us out online, heartland-sports.com. Find us on Facebook, 18,000 strong followers. We're thankful that you're here with us. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us your feedback. Drop a comment here and there. Let us know, are we crazy? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Enjoy your weekend. We'll be back to talk about it later on. Boomer Sooner.
But I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more just to be the man who walked 1,000 miles before down at your door. When I'm walking, yes, I know I'm gonna be the man who's working hard for you.